So, listening to myself, which I hate, I was listening to myself talking about God determining stuff, and then I was said some of the things I said. I think there's an issue here. There's words that they're almost like too vague. I believe God determined to make the world, and I don't necessarily think he was wondering about what was going to happen. So I think some terms need to be defined here. Is what I mean is God didn't decide for you to sin. Whether he saw it or didn't see it or saw it possible, the term allow, permit, and determine are different in their connotation. It is not true automatically that God, even if he knows the future impeccably and he starts the creation by making everything and then it happens. No, he does that. There's room to say God allows something. He lets it happen because he's made you an agent and you are able to choose that. To say otherwise is to smuggle in absolute fatalism into the premises of and saying it's the conclusion. Even if we can't explain it really well, it's self-evident. We even have to assume it about God. Because if you don't assume it about God, that he has freedom to choose like we do, then you have fatalism, period. You have fatalism. If you say God doesn't have free will, and then we don't either, and everything is determined by God, and every argument you give for humanity to say he doesn't have some sort of actual decisive role in his agency to make a choice that he didn't have to do. If you say there's no argument that shows that could be true or is true, then you have no argument to say God has that ability. That's different other than just a claim, just sweeping claim. If every argument given to suggest that there's a real serious, at least partial sort of libertarian free will of the agent in the traditional sense, then you have no reason to say God has it. And if that's true, it all unfolds back to fatalism if you're honest with the implications. Somewhere you have to, you can't just say, well, it's not fatalism, but everything is absolutely 100% determined by the preceding action of what came before it, working on it, kind of like physics or something. And if you believe that, you should believe that souls don't exist or are necessary for metaphysical anything. If everything is just determined by preceding pressures and events and influence, if you knew every detail, you know exactly what was going to happen. Is that the only way God could know everything in the future? Is the only way God can be all-knowing to you is because he has decided that everything will happen and set it up that way? What exactly is it that makes one responsible for their sins? If it works that way, if it just must be that way because we can't explain libertarian free will, I won't buy it. I don't buy it. I'm going to give up if I had to, I'd give up foreknowledge in that sense. I'd just say the future events. I would be an open theist in that sense because the text clearly says that God didn't determine evil. He allows it or permits it. Even the Presbyterians say that. Somebody back me up. If you say God uses your sin, which he made sure that you would do that sin before you were born, and punishes people, and I don't even know what it means to say before they were born, doing good or bad, if that is to be applied to every individual person's and salvation or loss of rewards and all that, I mean, that doesn't make any sense, people. That is not about people going to heaven or hell because they're good or bad or not because they're good or bad. It does not mean that. It means God made that decision for his holy purpose of salvation. And that was part of how God would do it from before they were done good or bad. Doesn't mean your heaven or hell is decided no matter what you do. The only thing decided beforehand was the plan of salvation, which had nothing to do with being good or bad, those who are elected to bring it about. You do have to do something. You have to humble yourself and surrender to God, or you won't be saved. And that offer goes to everyone, and they all have the ability. And those who are kept from that ability in some sense, God, because of his being just and loving and actually loving the world, will take that into account because he is loving. He doesn't have people he invented and groomed from birth to do evil things for his purposes so he could say they were bad and then throw them in hell. That is a deplorable and not what the Bible teaches. If you try to tell me that, I don't believe that. I'm just telling you honestly, this is how I feel about it. I don't hate Calvinism or Calvinists, but if you say that God literally from birth is fashioning and grooming you to do things he says are evil, and then to use that for his good purposes, which that there's no such thing as a good purpose in that, by the way. And you think he's determined it so you have to be that thing that's evil and hurts other people, which you're going to get in big trouble for. And then he punishes you for doing it because he made you that way. That is disgusting. That is despicable. It's true. That is despicable. He doesn't do that. Is what he does is he proves you as what you've become, and he's happy to prove that you are that for his purposes of redeeming those who have humbled themselves or will humble themselves in his display of his glory and love. But he does not groom people to be raped and murdered or to hurt people, to show how powerful he is, so that you'll bow the knee to his power and glorify his holy name when he's torturing people in hell forever. That's disgusting. It's despicable. It's not true. God is the creator. He is sovereign. Absolutely. And people mess that up, and Calvinists correct them on it rightly. But when you start telling me God uses sin for his holy purposes, which he does, by the way, but the idea that he's had to control it all the way from the ground up just for that so he can then punish you for it, no. He proves you for what you are and uses that where you have what you've become by rejecting him, and he uses that to prove out what you've become by your own choice to not humble yourself, and then righteously uses that for various purposes that are his good pleasure. But it does not mean, it just means that's what he's doing. It doesn't mean he has, because that would mean that bad is really good. You know that, right? If God determines everything for his holy purposes, there's no such thing as bad, because it is good when God uses an evil army to judge his people for what they've done, but not because he made his people do that and that he groomed a whole civilization to be evil to then punish what he's already determined his people apparently did that he's mad about. This doesn't make any, it's totally self-refuting. It's self-refuting. Let it go. That is not what it means. Because what it means is God is responsible, as in he takes responsibility for the fall to display his character of love and redemption. And he won't be mocked. And he'll use evil for good when it's appropriate for what it's become. Because all things that work out for good for those who love God. But those who love God, that is your decision and your choice to humble yourself and let God work through you. You have to buy what is free that God's offering. And no one will say on that day, I couldn't believe because you didn't grant it to me. Because I would say, hey, wait, didn't you give that guy a chance or like judge him appropriately? God is going to say, yes, he did have a chance. And he didn't take it like he should have and could have. He's not going to say, who are you, oh man? I can do whatever I want. I'm the powerful one. Yeah, and I didn't give anybody a chance. I gave whoever I chose randomly. Or, I mean, I have my reasons, but I'm not going to tell you. And it has nothing to do with whether or not you humbled yourself or whether or not you're good or bad. No. God is asking you to repent, all men everywhere. He wants you to because he loves you and he wants the best for you. And if you don't, it's on you. And if you do, he'll save you by his power and grace. Everything else is a joke. It's not true. It's philosophy gone wild. It's not understanding love. It's not understanding who God is. if God determines everything in that without other agents making a contribution as far as what will happen, God is sovereign. What the outcomes are decided. God only allows what he allows. No one can thwart that. But he determined to let us participate in such a way that we make decisions. Is what we have to do is recognize our sin and surrender to that and let him change us. You have to buy what is free, because it does cost you. It costs you your pride, and it costs you maybe your lifestyle. It costs you all sorts of things. But you can't earn it. Look, the reason knowledge is not the same word as cause in the Bible is because it isn't the same word. And the reason the word predestination and foreknowledge exist as two different words right next to each other is because they're two different words. Foreknowledge and predestination are two different words. They don't mean the same thing. If they did, it would have been a great opportunity for Paul to tell us that God determines everything. Because if he did, he wouldn't have had to use two different words with two different meanings there, because what God determines is what will be, and that's what he foreknows. And he foreknows it because he determines it. So if the Bible wanted us to think God determined everything in that strong sense, there would only be one word there. I mean, that's an argument. I mean, that's not necessarily, but it would have been helpful. Because Calvinists, you're basically defining those two words as meaning the same thing, because you don't, especially if you think Molinism isn't appropriate. If the Bible thought Molinism wasn't appropriate, foreknowledge and predestination would not be two different words. But I agree with you. If hard or hyper Calvinism ideas were true, they would mean the same thing, but then they'd be the same word. And there wouldn't be things like, if you go here, this would happen. No, it would just be like, God's doing this, and it is what it is. Molinism is at least true in the sense of if-then propositions are real, possible. They're just as real as, what can be. It's like there is only one universe. There is only one way it goes. It's the way you choose. You determine your choice. So yeah, that's compatibilism, sure. But you do it. God didn't determine you. God didn't put that crack pipe in your hand for his holy purpose. God didn't have that woman raped for a holy purpose. That's not a holy there's no holy purpose in sin in and of itself. It doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. It's impossible. It's making evil. It's making God evil. If determinism was true, who are you, oh man? Who are you, oh man? To say that. To say, who are you, oh man? God determined me to say, who are you, oh man? It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's self-refuting.